Okay, so I will say four stereotypical sentences to you, and I want your reaction to them. Okay, blind people don't play sports.
I would just say, here's my name, go Google me. I think when I look at my disability being legally blind, I always look at it with gratitude, with positivity. I'm so thankful and grateful I was born legally blind. I think what's important to understand is you're not going to have a challenge put in front of you that you can't overcome. I was born legally blind for a reason. It happened for me, not to me.
Welcome back to Rolling Tip by Sensable. This is your host, Sakshi Srivastava. Today's guest is Aaron Golub, an entrepreneur, a speaker, a leadership coach, and also the first legally blind athlete to play in a NCAA Division I football game. In this conversation, Aaron shares how being born legally blind not only impacted his mindset and perspective towards life and community, but also his journey from sports to entrepreneurship. Along with that, he shares through this conversation how, given a chance, he would not change a thing about his path so far. So let's dive right in. So, Aaron, thank you for doing this, first of all. And please tell us about yourself as like an individual, including but not limited to your visual impairment.
Yeah, so my short background is my name's Aaron Golub. I'm legally blind, and what that means for me is my right eye's totally blind. My left eye see out of a tiny hole. Played football at Tulane University, where I became the first legally blind Division I athlete to play in a game. Was named team captain. Went on to become an NFL free agent, and now I'm an entrepreneur and a speaker. And so I'm involved in a few businesses, and one of them is me doing speaking engagements around the world.
Wow, that's a big life. Tell us about your experience with visual impairment. When did it start? How did it go? What brought you here to this point in life?
Yeah, I was born legally blind, and so I've known nothing different my entire life. Basically, I was born, with basically the same vision, and it's, stayed pretty much the same my whole life up until now, at least.
Okay. How did your family support you and the larger ecosystem support you through the journey?
My family has always been, supportive of things I wanted to do or helping me get there. Of course, there were times that they were nervous or worried, when it comes to football, for example,
Yeah,
especially in the beginning. My parents, I think, were were very concerned, just
I'm
going
sure.
out there and playing, and what happens if I get hit or things of that nature. But they're also always there to support. They knew and they understood that for me, playing football was something that I needed to do, and I need to do it for myself. And they've always been there to help and support in any way they could.
Nice. Along the way, apart from these challenges, these emotional level challenges where we don't know what life might look like if you want to do something specific with visual impairment, what were the other challenges do you think off the top of your head that the ecosystem, put your way and you wish and you kind of overcame? What were some of those challenges
Not related to visual impairment,
related to visual impairment?
related to I think the typical ones, off the top of my head, things like not being able to drive a car, and so learning how to get around without being able to do that, and little things like that. The challenge of in school having to do work differently, and use technology that other kids at the time maybe weren't using, and have extra accommodation. So little challenges like that for sure. But then also in the workplace, when I got out of college or when I had internships in college, adapting to different technologies or different things that I hadn't done before, and being able to use technology or use things to allow me to have those accommodations and adapt. And so in every situation there's always challenges. Even cooking dinner, there's
Yeah.
challenges there, but it's learning how to adapt because of them. Sometimes that means doing things a little differently, and that's okay. We all have challenges, whether it's a visual impairment or something else, and it's understanding how do we adapt to succeed despite whatever that challenge may be for us.
Yeah. So you mentioned sports, you mentioned cooking. Is there anything else you think you've done or aspire to do which kind of challenge the traditional notion of what a blind or a visually impaired person can or should do?
Yeah, I mean, look, right now my focus is, in the world of business, in the world of entrepreneurship, and I'm involved in different things, and that's great. I've built a business for myself doing speaking, and I'm a partner in other things as well. But I think my ultimate goal, whether it's somewhat of a visual impairment or not, is to build a very successful company. I
Yeah.
have a vision to build something much greater than what I've currently done. And what I've done is awesome, and that's fantastic, but it's not where the, end goal is. And, I don't look at it as, okay, this is a, challenge for someone who's visually impaired or not. It's, for anyone to build, a massive company the way that my goal is set, it's hard. And, that's where my focus is, right now of building something that is, truly impressive in that sense.
And I can promise you that definitely breaks the norm of what the larger society expects of visually impaired or blind or any kind of disabled person. So I really hope you reach that point very soon and we can break that stereotype one more time. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you share some positive experiences or learnings or just, something positive that came out of your disability?
Yeah, I think when I look at my disability being legally blind, I always look at it with gratitude, with positivity. I'm so thankful and grateful I was born legally blind. It's I say it all the time, it's the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. If I could go back to birth and change it, I wouldn't do so. Because being legally blind is, I strongly believe, what allowed me to play football at the level I did, what allowed me to create the relationships I have, the businesses that I run, and turn me into the person I am today. And because of that, I'm grateful. Yeah, there's challenges associated with it, but everyone has challenges. I think what's important to understand is you're not going to have a challenge put in front of you that you can't overcome. I was born legally
Mhm.
blind for a reason. It happened for me, not to me. And whenever you can look at your challenges, your obstacles as them happening for you, not to you, you can understand how to overcome them and how to succeed despite them.
Yeah, I I fully agree with that. I think I've spoken to so many blind people and visually impaired people, low vision people in the past couple of months, and not one of them has shared that they would change it if they were given a choice. I fully understand that. Like I started losing vision at a later stage in life, so the first couple of years were rough. But at this point, I can very confidently say that I wouldn't change a thing about it because,
Well,
yeah.
just to interject there, I mean, look, if there was a technology tomorrow that would fix my vision, I would take it in 2 seconds. I would
Sure.
absolutely change it. That's not
Yeah.
even a question. Would I change
Yeah.
the experience I've had up until now? No. But if there was something that I could have full sight tomorrow, would I take that chance and change it? Yes, absolutely, 100%.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's more about the journey and the rather than the exact condition or what we are seeing visually. I think it's more about the journey and the learnings and the growth we've been through because of this. Okay. So, what are some of the most common misconceptions that come your way about your disability?
It goes back to the little things of how do you do something? How do you as someone who's legally blind cook, or how do you navigate an airport, or how do you get yourself around town? It's those misconceptions of people don't know what you can and can't do. They question
Yeah.
how do you get around safely, or how do you do something, and it's showing them that there's ways to do it. It's just adapting and making changes that not everyone has to make in their life.
Yeah. Diving a bit deeper into what you just mentioned about navigation, how do you just take us through how you navigate yourself to and it within a new location?
For me, I have enough vision where, I can see my way around. I can't see, something that's smaller in the distance, or if I look at my phone, I hold it close to my face. But, for me, I definitely, run into things from time to time, and that's okay. I have no problem with that. I also, if I'm in an area that I know it and can get myself from point A to point B, very easily without a problem at all. If I'm in a brand new city, it's going to be a lot harder for me to find my way around. and I'm probably not going to want to walk around much because I don't know my way around. I don't know that city. And so that's kind of when I'm in a place that I've been to several times and I know the area, it's not really a problem. I know how to walk around. I know where things are. I know how to get around. And it's more in those kind of new environments for me. If you were to go drop me, I've been to New York many times for, for
Mhm.
business and things. But if you were to drop me in the middle of Manhattan, for lack of a better term, I'd be screwed.
I get that. But if you just absolutely had to, are there any tools that you would use, like say Google Maps? I think the obvious one. Anything apart from that, any tool that you would have to use to get your way through it?
Yeah, I mean, I would either just Uber from point A to point B, or I would, put in an AirPod and put in, the, Maps tool and just have it direct me of where to go if I had to.
Yeah. Okay. How do you feel about representation of disabled people in the sports industry?
Can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
So in mainstream, there are Paralympics. I come from a land which is crazy about cricket. So there are all these different forms of cricket as a sport, and blind people teams, blind teams, and there are competitions and matches for blind people. However, in the larger global community, if you go to a regular sighted person and you tell them, you know what, there's this team I'm super excited about. They are, let's say, blind or visually impaired, and they're going to be playing X sport. That's not taken as something that's just the norm, right? It's when we think sports, we don't think disability. They seem to be like very different groups in our heads, right? For the masses. So, do you have any thoughts on that, or would you just disagree that no, that's not true?
I mean, I think it just depends. Even myself, I don't watch much sports that have to do with I don't watch much sports in general at this point, but I don't watch really any sports that are not kind of the mainstream sports. And not saying that's right or wrong by any means. It's what do you want to watch and pay attention to, and what sport are you interested in, and those types of things. And I think that it just depends, and whatever is that mainstream that someone resonates with, I
Yeah,
think is important. For me, if I watch
makes
sports, it's
sense.
mostly football.
Yeah, that makes sense. Of course, you are a player, so I get that. Um, have you ever encountered this idea of a good blind or a specific kind of blind person? Like this hypothetical version of a blind person who is supposed to do this or be this or think like that or be an activist, have a specific kind of vocabulary. There are all these norms, right? Expectations from a good blind person. Have you ever encountered something like that? If yes, then do you think it helps or does it hold us back?
I have not encountered that ever. I've never heard that term before.
Congratulations.
Truthfully, um, I mean, I've been asked, many times when I speak at companies, like what language is right for something, and stuff like that. But I've never been heard of that term of like a good blind.
I don't think that's like a general term. That's just how I describe it because a lot of times you're doing something or saying something or sharing something, and other blind people would kind of question it. Like, why would you say it like that? Why not say it like that? Why do you use this vocabulary? Why don't you use that vocabulary? From a sense of curiosity, of course, it's great. But
Yeah.
I do feel there are a lot of blind people as well within the community who expect us to be a certain way. And I think the younger generation relatively is kind of breaking that stereotype. I just wanted to get your take on that. Have you ever experienced
Yeah.
something like that?
I mean, let me give you this as an example because I'm not 100% sure there, but I get asked a lot of times when I go into a company and speak. One of the questions, oh, like what's the right term? Is disabled or differently abled or what? I'm like, it doesn't matter. Like I don't care. Like I genuinely don't. Like say whatever you want to me. I don't. But a lot of people are not me. Everyone's different, and asking them their opinion. My opinion is I think us as a society needs to have thicker skin. I think that us as a society needs to get offended less by different things. I genuinely believe that. However, and I say that because 99.9% of people are not doing anything in bad intention. They say something,
So
they
true.
use a certain vocabulary, and maybe it offends you, but they by no means meant to offend you. And then you get offended, and then it makes a like that's what happens most of the time. Yes, there's that like 0.01% of people who are being rude or whatever, but most people are not meaning to offend you in any way, shape, or form. Maybe they just don't know what they don't know, and that's totally fine, and you have to understand that. But I do think that us as a society needs to be more understanding in that way of like,
Yeah.
look, you can't expect everyone to use the exact phrases, the exact words, the exact vocabulary that you want, and we
Yeah.
can't just get offended by a little thing.
Yeah, so true. So along those lines, same line of thought, but there's this idea of a monolith, right? That blindness and visual impairment, the whole community is a single monolith. Um, Obviously, it's more true outside of the community than for people who are within it. Uh, but still, again, there are all these versions of expectations from blind people. For example, do you feel responsible for the larger community when you're stepping out there, just living your life? Do you feel like you're representing a very large community and you have to act a certain way or behave a certain way or just be a certain way to represent the entire community? Or do you feel like all of us can find our individuality without shouldering that responsibility?
To be completely transparent, that thought has never crossed my mind in my entire life. I do not think about representing a community at all. I think about representing myself and,
Yeah.
being the best that I possibly can, be in all
I love
aspects. But,
that.
my vision has absolutely nothing to do that. I want to my goal in life is to build a, 9+ figure company. And, that's not anything to do with my vision. That's something that very few people, do. And hopefully I'll get there one day. We'll see. But like, I don't think of, you know, vision or blindness or disabilities in that sense at all.
Yeah. I get that. What were some of the early on, like what were the tools or the community or the resources that you reached out to kind of, did you have to get some kind of training? Did you reach out to a community? Did your parents introduce you to some groups? Did anything like that happen as you were finding your way through life?
So, I mean, when I was younger, I learned things like Braille and those types of stuff in school and all of that. But truthfully, again, most of that stuff I always pushed against, and it was never, an interest of mine. Things like different groups or different things. I never wanted to do that, and maybe part of that as a kid was because I didn't want to be perceived as different or something. One of
Right.
the reasons I think that I played football was because I wanted to play a mainstream sport
Yeah.
and I didn't, I had opportunities where, I could have done things in like the Paralympics and stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. That's awesome. Anyone who knows that, that's fantastic. But that wasn't my goal was more on kind of something that was mainstream, and that's what I wanted. And so, for me, I never in never surrounded myself with those types of like groups or things, and that was just kind of how I developed. There's no right or wrong
Of
answer
course.
there, but that's just my experience.
I think I absolutely love this. I'll be honest, because most people I talk to who are, out there and doing some successful things and have a great job, they all kind of have had that support system and resources, and they uh, feel like, they can always fall back onto that or reach out to them when they're struggling or something. And I, as an individual, have not had that opportunity or the privilege, I would say. Um, I started losing my vision in India, and we don't have like that's not a big culture for us, and it was really hard for me to find even a single other blind person, even if not by choice. I just never had that, and I still kind of grew into this person who does not, think of myself as just a blind or a visually impaired person. So it was kind of new when I started uh, connecting with all these groups and communities. So I think I kind of see the positives in that as well, is what I'm trying to say. It's not just it's not very black and white. It doesn't mean that, reaching out to those communities is just absolutely perfect and there could be nothing wrong with that. There are some drawbacks to that as well,
Yeah.
as I feel at this point, having seen both sides. And I think the fact that you're all the way here and not expecting yourself to be a certain version of yourself is like fantastic. And I think that keeps us going much
Yeah.
further.
And look,
Um,
everyone's different. For some people it is the right fit, some people it's not, and everyone is different. For me, I
of
think the
course.
reason for it is it's nothing to do with if you're blind or not blind. Transparently,
Mhm.
like I don't know or communicate with that many people who are blind, if any, to be honest
Yeah.
with you.
Yeah.
Um, and it's nothing to do with they are or aren't. If someone enters my sphere and is blind and is doing something that resonates with me, and we have mutual interest, then awesome, great. Then we'll probably stay in touch and communicate in those things. But
Yeah.
it doesn't even come to thought for me of like a criteria for someone that I am in touch with or communicate with.
I love that. I absolutely love that. That kind of makes you much bigger than just one particular identity. Um,
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, final question. If you had a suggestion for someone who just learned that they're going to be living with some kind of visual impairment, what is the one suggestion you would give them?
I think understand that it's not the end of the world. Understand that you can still do great things. I mean, yes, there's going to have to be changes. I can't drive a car, I can't fly a plane. Like, of course there are things that I can't do, but
Mhm.
there's also plenty of things that I can do. I think
Yeah.
understanding that's really important, so you are aware that it's not the end of the world. You might need to adapt, you might need to do a different job or get a different hobby, but you can, find something that you enjoy. You can find, success in different things. For me, when I was a kid, my first sport that I wanted to play was baseball. Found out pretty early on that, me hitting an 80-mile-an-hour fastball is not going to go super well.
Yeah.
But then I was able to find football and find a position in football that worked for me. And so it's just making adjustments and finding something that does work.
Amazing. Okay, so I have four to close this interview up,
Yeah.
the last section. I will say four stereotypical sentences to you, and I want your reaction to them. Okay. Imagine you're
Okay.
walking down the street and some random stranger just throws that to your face. Okay. Number one, only old people go blind.
I would just be confused. Like I don't get it. Like that just clearly false.
Yeah. Okay. Blind people can't cook.
I would say, look, I'm not a great cook. I don't like to cook, but you still can cook. You might not want to eat what I cook, but I definitely can cook.
Okay. All blind people use a white cane.
That's just not true. I don't use one. And plenty of people don't. There's lots of options out there.
Final one. Blind people don't play sports.
Yeah, I would just say to Google me. Like that's just so false. I would just say, here's my name, go Google me, and leave it at
Yeah, they'll discover how false that statement is.
that.
Awesome. I love that. Okay. I think this is one of the best conversations we've done because and my editors will love it. So
Yeah, no,
um
I love it. Thank you.
awesome. Thank you so much, Aaron, for doing this.
Yeah,
Absolutely appreciate your time. We will keep you posted about this and we'll make sure we tag everything everywhere.
of course, of course. Let me know when it's out, and happy to kind of share and anything, and excited to see it.
I'd love to. Awesome. Thank you so much, Aaron. Have a
Yeah, thank
fantastic
you as
day.
well. You too.